The woman who lives across the street from me scares the hell out of me. A few weeks after my family moved into a new house, the people across the street moved in. We lived in a new housing complex. All the houses were new builds, and you could pick the design of your home. Families moved in when construction was complete on each home. So the neighbourhood was pretty quiet to begin with, but then it began to grow. I think our house was one of the first ones to be completed, and the house across the street was either the second or the third. The wife and mother of the family across the street was about the same age as me. Our children didn't seem that different in age too. It seemed like a pretty nice match, and I hoped that we would be friends. Thankfully, we got off on the right foot, and we would often do things together. I can't count the amount of times that I went over to their place for dinner or tea. It was pretty nice. In return, she was often invited over to our place. By all accounts, we were good neighbours and good friends. However, one day, all the niceties went out of the window. I don't know what happened to the woman living across the street, but it was as if the change was instantaneous. She became a new person. She started to avoid me, my family and our house. Well, at first I thought it might have been just my imagination, but it wasn't. I went over to her thinking that she must not have seen me waving or heard me calling her name, but she knew I was there. She was just ignoring me. We were stood face to face at one point, and she pretended as if I simply wasn't there. I didn't understand what happened. I didn't understand why she changed. She then developed a creepy habit. Whenever my family either entered or exited our house, she would be there staring at us through the gap in the curtains. It was as if she was waiting for us, and she was surveilling us. I saw her doing this early in the morning, in the middle of the day, and late at night. It didn't make a difference what time it was. It was always whenever we came home. I remember one really late night when we came back from a holiday. I noticed the light go on in the house across the street, and the curtain twitch, and there she was, watching us. It was really, really scary to me. For her to go from a friend to some creepy voyeur without a single word was just terrifying. I hated the way she stared at my family, yet ignored me in public. But it gets weirder. This I cannot explain, so if you have any ideas, please share them. Okay, whenever I left a window open on a rainy day or left it open at night, she would ring our house phone to tell us not to forget to close it. When she did this, she would sound like the old version of herself. Or was she warning me? I thought about it for so long. I don't know what happened to her. I really don't. She ignores me in the street, and I just live in fear that one day she's gonna do something. I live in a mostly quiet area. It's really safe and a really peaceful little place. The buildings are really old and most of the residents are just as old. I think I must have been one of the youngest residents. As I was walking back to my apartment one night, I noticed something strange. There was a bright light coming from the apartment opposite mine. I stood there on the communal walkway, looking into that apartment to see if I could see anything, but I couldn't. There was nothing but darkness staring back at me. I had no help from the moon or the streetlight. They only obscured the view. Something was going on in that apartment. Someone seemed to be shining a light into my place. I couldn't figure out why someone would want to do that. Was this some kind of harassment, or was someone planning a burglary and checking if I was out? All these different thoughts were going around my head. The lights in the opposite apartment stayed off, and the torchlight continued to flick towards my place. I didn't like it. I was a single woman, living alone at the time, and I didn't want to think of someone trying to look in on my apartment. I had an idea. The torchlight seemed to be pointing towards the balcony outside of my bedroom window, so I figured if I hung something on the washing line that night, whoever was flashing the light wouldn't be able to see me. This seemed to work for me, and nothing much happened that night. I made sure all the doors and windows were locked. I must have triple-checked them. I didn't think of getting the police involved. To me, it could have been just some kids playing a game, but I didn't want their torchlight to keep me up all night. I did think about it quite a bit at work the next day. I guessed that there were strange people out in a place which appeared to be so quiet and peaceful. By the time I was home, I had concluded that it was just a part of life. My thoughts were interrupted when I saw an ambulance outside of my building. One of my neighbours, who was part of a small crowd that had gathered at the scene, told me that an old man in our neighbourhood had passed away. It turned out that he was the owner of the house, with the torchlight flashing at my place across the way. I will never forget what the neighbour said next. It's a shame. Poor fella. It was his heart, you know. They say that he tried to save himself, get someone's attention. He was found with a flashlight torch in his hand. I guess that was all he could reach while he was on the ground. I felt an indescribable sense of guilt, and I still do. If only I hadn't been so paranoid.
My family used to live in public housing when I was in elementary school. It was pretty sweet actually, because about 5 or 6 friends of mine lived in the same building. It was a pretty dated apartment block. Back when I was a kid, and I'm showing my age here, RC cars were popular. One of the kids who was more well off than the rest of us had a little 4-wheel drive remote control car, and I absolutely loved it. We used to drive that little car through all the communal areas of our building. We would zip that car through all the hallways, down the stairs, and around the entrance where all the mail slots were. Back then, we were always discouraged from playing on the 7th floor. My parents said to stay away, and so did my friends. There was a good reason to be cautious. On that floor lived a woman who seemed to despise children. We were even told to walk past her in silence, as she was likely to be hostile for seemingly no reason. We figured out quite quickly that if you made any form of noise in front of her place, then she would come out and chase you off. So for us kids, we saw that as an opportunity to dare each other. One afternoon after school, we were playing with the RC car, and one of my friends mentioned driving it past the crazy lady's apartment on the 7th floor. Well, all my friends were super enthusiastic about doing this, but I was being a bit of a chicken, if I'm perfectly honest. I didn't want to be in trouble with my parents, so the owner of the car revved up that little remote-controlled car and drove it past the lady's apartment. They all bolted after the car, but I was still feeling a little reluctant to join in, and this proved to be the biggest mistake I made that year. Maybe ever, actually. I was jogging along behind my sprinting friends. They were laughing and screaming, and just as soon as we passed her door, it shot open and she came charging after us. I think I would have gotten away from her if the kid in front of me was moving a little quicker. He stopped to pick up the car, and that was when I felt her hand land on my shoulder. That hand swiftly moved to my wrist, and then my wrist was pulled upwards behind my back in a painful jolt. I was caught. I was terrified. I couldn't move because I was restrained, but even if I wasn't, I doubt I would have been able to move either, because I was experiencing true fear for the first time in my young life. The origin of that new fear came from what I saw in her free hand, a kitchen knife. She stood there, seething with anger, staring into my eyes, with unwavering eyes of her own. She didn't speak. She just stared at me with a blank face. Then she dragged me, pulled me, and shoved me into her apartment. I couldn't do a thing. She had a knife. All my friends had gone. I felt so helpless. As soon as I was through the door, she locked it, and I began to panic. Due to my panic, my memory from here is a little vague to say the least. I remember that all the windows and curtains were shut, and everything in there was dark. It had a strange smell, like incense sticks or something. I started crying and I couldn't stop. I found no sympathy on her face when I paused to wipe my eyes. I was deeply concerned for my well-being. She handed me a baked cookie, and this was the first time she spoke. She said, "Eat." I didn't have much choice, so I ate. I remember it tasted horrible. It didn't even taste like a cookie. I remember trying to hide pieces of it under the table because I simply couldn't bring myself to eat it all. I don't know how long it passed. I don't remember much. Later, I did hear a familiar voice at the crazy lady's door. That voice belonged to my mother. I didn't know if it was real or not, but I later found out. Also, there seemed to be another woman living with the crazy lady. I don't remember much, but she said she wanted to get me home, and I felt like she was my savior. Then I remember crying. I don't know what I was crying over, but it could have been relief. Relief that I was going to be let out of that horrible apartment. I remember police officers and my mother shouting and shouting my name. After that, I knew I went to see a counselor, and I remember being way behind all the other kids at school for a while. Something really weird happened, and I'm not sure if remembering it is a bad thing. As far as I'm concerned, it's all in the past, and I thank my lucky stars that I'm not too traumatized. Whenever I mention it to my mother, even as an adult, she makes a face. She doesn't want to talk about it. She still seems distressed. I have 2 questions I'm scared of knowing the answer to. Number 1, what was in that cookie? And number 2, what happened in the periods of missing time I cannot account for?
About 10 or so years ago, I moved into a quiet residential area. I was really excited to live there. The neighborhood looked perfect. It looked like something out of a wholesome made-for-daytime TV movie. And the neighbors were all so nice. They came to greet me as I was unloading boxes from the moving truck. They said things like, "If you need anything, all you gotta do is ask." My partner and I were really happy there for about 5 years or so. The happiness ended when I found out that my partner was cheating on me. She divorced me and moved out and in with her new man. We didn't have kids, but I foolishly put the mortgage solely in my name, and she wasn't interested in how much financial pressure she put me under. I had no choice but to live alone. As a couple, we had participated often in community events and festivals, but since she left, I didn't feel like going to any events anymore. I guess that I didn't want to see the sympathetic looks and hear the probing questions. Plus, in order to keep a roof over my head, I needed to work more. I barely had a moment to myself, let alone time for neighborhood events. One day I decided to formally resign from the community association, and as soon as I did that, something changed in the neighborhood. The atmosphere had shifted. After I left the community association, everyone in the neighborhood began to ignore me. I would say hello to the family across the street, but they would pretend like they didn't hear or see me. I didn't get it because the guy was really nice, and I thought that we got on well whenever we spoke. He was the kind of guy to speak about anything. It was as if his tongue was scared of the dark. I remember one time he spoke to me for about 10 minutes about his garbage, so this was highly unusual. It wasn't just him and his family, it was everyone. All my neighbors were pretending like I didn't exist. It was clear that I was being targeted. I guess that they must have felt as if they were really upsetting me, but to be honest, they weren't. I was fine with not having to speak to them. People who ignore others like that are incredibly narrow-minded in my opinion, so why would I want them as acquaintances? However, my indifference to their stupid ignoring game only served to irritate them. They ramped up their targeting behavior. Thinking back on it, maybe I should have tried to make amends, but I don't think it would have made much difference. The harassment began as a direct response to my ignoring of them. I woke up one morning to find trash all over my lawn. It was as if it had been deliberately thrown there. I didn't see who did it, so I couldn't be sure it was one of my neighbours. It could have just as easily been a cat or a crow, but I had my suspicions. I cleaned it up and kept my suspicions to myself for the time being. But then something else happened. The garbage I threw out in the communal garbage area was put back in my garbage can. I knew that this couldn't be the work of animals. Not wanting to make an issue out of it, I just put the same bag back out again and went out to work. When I came home, I found that it had been returned back to my garbage can once again. If it was a one-off, I could have understood it, but it wasn't. It happened time and time again. I decided to install some home surveillance cameras. I hoped that this would help me monitor what was going on while I was at work. However, as soon as the cameras were up, the harassment stopped. I had no evidence. It was a nice place to live, and if this was all they had to irritate me with, and a camera stopped it, then I thought, hey, I don't need to worry. I didn't have to talk to my neighbours anymore. I didn't need to sponsor their kids' run or waste my weekends with small talk around the barbecue. For me, it felt like a win. But then the silent calls came. Someone kept calling my home phone, and whenever I picked it up, they said nothing. So I disconnected the phone line. I used my mobile phone more anyways, so I kinda made a saving. When my home phone number was out of service, I started getting the calls on my mobile. It didn't seem as if it was gonna end. This went on for a long time. I felt so exhausted by it all. I know that it all sounds relatively minor, but if you put yourself in my shoes, you would see what I mean. Imagine everyone in the neighbourhood ignoring you, and then trying to find a new way to mess with you at every opportunity they could. They did other things that I don't even want to repeat. Enough was enough. As nice as the area was, it wasn't worth all of this, I thought. I found a new place to live, and after a while, I was able to carve out a situation where I was able to leave, so I decided to move. On moving day, all the neighbours crowded around to watch me stack boxes in the rental van. They stood there silently, grinning, enjoying what they had done. I hated that, so I had to speak up. I had to get something off my chest. What the hell is wrong with you people? I shouted at them. Look, when you join the community association, you don't leave it. People who break the rules of the community don't belong here. So, what do you want from us? We're glad you're leaving. This is a family community, and you don't fit the bill anymore, do you? My neighbour across the street said. I had no words. It was like a cult, and it was all I could do not to haul off and hit the guy. And rules? What rules? Oh, so sorry guys, my wife left me. Please give me another chance to live in your creepy society. What a bunch of cruel-hearted people I unfortunately used to call my neighbours. That experience taught me to thoroughly investigate and research the area I choose to live in. I'm doing much better now. This happened around the time my parents got divorced. I started living in an apartment with my mother. Before the divorce, my mum used to be a housewife, but she had to get a job to support us both. She worked overtime most nights, and to be honest, it was a pretty lonely period of my life. I couldn't be selfish though. I had to grin and bear it, and I was happy to do so because I knew my mother was doing it for us. But like I said, because my mum was working late every night, I was home alone most nights. What stood out to me about those days was the constant laughter I heard from my neighbours. Next door lived a family of 5. mother, father, and 3 daughters. They were a noisy family. The noises and laughter I heard were really loud, especially around dinner time. They all sounded like they were having so much fun. I envied them. Their laughter was poison to me. There was nothing worse than hearing all that fun and good times while I was home alone, pining for my family to get back together. Every time I heard their laughter, I would think to myself, I wish they were as unhappy as I was. It was depressing when I compared my life to theirs. Then one night, someone knocked at our door. I opened the door with the chain on. Out in the hall was a woman I hadn't seen before, and she was holding some sweets. She said, "Hi, I'm going to be your new neighbor. I'm moving in tomorrow, and I thought I would just stop by and say hello and apologize for any noise. It's great to meet you." I was taken aback because I thought that I already had neighbors. It was weird, but I accepted the sweets and welcomed her to the building. I planned on telling my mother about her later, when she was home from work. Later that evening, I heard the regular, irritating noise of happiness coming from next door. I could hear those 3 girls laughing and playing. They certainly didn't sound like they were boxing up their things. I couldn't believe what happened earlier that evening. I stayed up and waited for my mother to come home. It was the first time in a long while that I had done so. Usually, I was asleep when she got back. When she came through the door, I told her everything. I told her about the lady who said she was moving in, and she didn't seem all that surprised to hear about it. I asked out loud, "I wonder if the family next door will move out then?" My mum looked at me dumbfounded, and she said, "That apartment's been empty for a few weeks now." I laughed out loud when I heard that. I thought that Mum had been working so much overtime that she hadn't ever heard the noise of the neighbours. When I told her that we'd been living next door to a family of 5 since we got there, she stared at me with a puzzled look on her face. That was the night that I learned that no one had been living next door. After I found that out, I never heard the laughter from the family again. I wondered if I imagined it all, to keep myself from feeling so alone. I wondered if it was all a figment of my imagination. For years, I felt as if I had a powerful sense of imagination, but it wasn't until I was older that I learned the truth. A few years after we moved out, my mother and I were talking about the old place we used to live in. She said that I probably was old enough for the truth now. Apparently, there was a family suicide in our neighbor's apartment a long time ago. And now I wonder, was the laughter I heard from that family? When she told me about that, it kinda hurt.
I bought a house about 5 years ago. It wasn't a new build, but it was perfect for us. We moved in, and life was comfortable and peaceful with our 3 children. The peace continued for about 3 months, right up until our neighbors moved in. 2 parents and a child, kind of like our family. The parents were about our age, and the boy was in 6th grade. He was a similar age to our kids, so it seemed perfect. We got on well without it getting too close. I was always of the opinion that if you got off on the wrong foot with your neighbor, then bad impressions can last for years. If you get too close to your neighbor, then if you ever fell out or one side expected more, then things could get awkward too. I kept things simple. I was always polite, but quite happy to keep a bit of a distance between our families. I think my neighbors wanted to be a little closer, but we really didn't go beyond small talk. Don't get me wrong, we liked them. They were nice people, but one day we were invited to go to a day camp with them, and then afterwards dinner at their house. I spoke with my wife to see what she thought. She didn't want to go. We just couldn't be bothered to go camping with them. I will say this though, judge me if you want. The kid kinda freaked me out. He was always staring off into space, and he wouldn't really talk. The only words I ever heard that boy say was, "Yeah." We kept declining their offers until one day I spoke with my wife, and we agreed, for the benefit of getting along, we should go and have dinner with them. When we went into their home, I noticed that it was much smaller than ours. There was only one bedroom on the second floor. They told us that that room was filled with all the equipment that the husband bought for his hobbies. He liked to play the drums, although I never heard him play them. There was a living room and a dining room kitchen. I was thinking to myself, where the hell do these guys sleep? I didn't see a kid's bedroom, so I assumed that they all slept in the living room. In the garden, there was a shed with a sliding door. It looked big enough to store a motorbike. Probably another one of the husband's hobbies, I thought to myself. So we had dinner, and it was fine. We said that we would have to have them over at our place, and vague plans were created for later in the month. I was already planning on being suddenly busy when it was our turn to host. One night, a few weeks after we went over to their house, 5 or 6 people showed up at theirs. We later found out that they were from child services. They were there for their son. They took him away. We were both completely shocked. According to their neighbors on the other side, the child's living space was the shed in the garden. They made their kids sleep in the shed. Apparently there was a desk in there, a bed, and it even had internet access. But to ostracize your child and make them live away from their parents, that cannot be right. That must have put the poor boy under a lot of mental turmoil. Why wouldn't they let him be in their house? Why couldn't his stupid drum equipment go in the shed? I felt so disgusted by them and myself for being in their company. Thankfully, the neighbor on the other side was able to see what was going on, and it was that neighbor who put the call into child services. I'm ashamed with myself for not noticing the neglect. I imagine there were more painful truths we weren't aware of. By the way, even though their child has been taken out of their custody, their attitudes haven't ever changed. They walk the neighborhood without an ounce of shame. We still get invited to dinner, although we never go. They are living a normal and happy life, without any remorse it seems. Also, they're free. I don't agree with that. They should have been arrested. So, you can never really know what is truly happening next door. The smiles of our neighbors could hide dark secrets.
About 7 years ago, my family and I lived next door to a pretty strange neighbor. Whatever our family did, our neighbors copied. It was just so weird. I think we first noticed it when my dad called out a gardener to do some work. The next day, the neighbor called out a gardener. We all thought at the time it kind of made sense since our properties shared a border, so we didn't make much of a big deal over it. The next time we noticed was after my dad spent an entire Saturday painting our house. He wanted to use some special waterproof anti-peeling paint that he bought. The following day, Sunday, we saw that the neighbor was out painting his house in the exact same color Dad had painted ours. It looked as if it could be the exact same shade too. The third thing we noticed was when my dad got a new car, an orange one. My mum lectured him on the poor choice in color he picked and pointed out that it stood out like a sore thumb. Shortly after, the neighbor did the same thing, same brand, and in the same color. It was really strange at that point, and it was really irritating my parents, I could tell. Next, we applied for planning permission to put in an extension on our land. I think my dad did this so he could have more space to do his DIY projects. Essentially, he made the garage a little bigger. You can probably guess what happened next. You got it, Our neighbour did the same thing. He copied the exact same design my dad used. The rivalry and unashamed copying of our lifestyle was one thing, but it wasn't the creepiest thing about the family next door. The creepiest thing about them to me was the following. I never smelled any kind of smell coming from their home. I know that might sound a little dumb, but hear me out. I'm sure at one point or another you've smelled either your neighbor's cooking or something, right? No? Well, maybe they've had a fire or a barbecue in the garden. I never once got a whiff of anything from my neighbor's house. Not only that, but I never heard anything from that house either. No music, no TV, no children playing, no arguments, no games, no nothing. It was as if the family next door just sat in silence the whole time they lived there. I didn't see them coming or going either. I didn't know what they did during the day or night. They were seldom seen, seldom heard. My little brother insisted that they were not of our planet Earth, and he was certain that they were aliens. He thought that they were sent here to learn how to imitate human life. I thought it was dumb, but I would be lying if I said it didn't seem plausible at the time. I also would be lying if I said the thought of aliens living next door to me didn't keep me up at night, because it did. They did creep me out. We didn't live next door to them for long though, thankfully. I guess they were our neighbors for only about half a year. They moved on without saying goodbye, and I didn't see any moving vans. After that, our new neighbors moved in. They were a noisy family, plus they had chickens, so, that was great. Not only that, but they were out by the fire every summer with their guitars singing and making noise till late most nights. To be honest with you, it made me miss living next door to the aliens. I mean, at least they were quiet. Just like to take a moment to thank my great guest, Mr. Revenant. If you haven't already, please go ahead and check out his channel. It's amazing. You'll find lots of creepy, regular uploads there. And why don't you stay a while here as well and listen to another story? Please remember to subscribe, like, comment, and share. It really helps me out. I'll see you soon.